Alright guys, I get it. A lot of us just like to bash on Genshin given any opportunity. I'm no stranger to doing that as well every now and then. You hate something, you hate it. That's just how it is. You dislike something, then you dislike it. But at the very least, make your dislike make sense. Make it so that you want to criticize something for the sake of actually criticizing it and hate it with your chest. And if you want to just blindly hate something just because it makes you look cool, at least try to disguise it. Why am I starting this video off like this? Well, the other day I was just doing my regularly scheduled scrolling through Instagram instead of sleeping routine when I came across this post. The user Nubaruki here posted some Azure Lane related content where the video seemed to be showcasing a dev video where they compared how the game's graphics will be improved and were doing a side-by-side comparison. Pretty tame so far, right? Just a random video as far as you're concerned. But what really got me squinting was actually the caption included at the top of the comparison video, which reads, Azure Lane just upgraded their character models and made the game look better than ever. Meanwhile, a certain multi-million-dollar game still can't do the bare minimum for theirs. Now before a lot of you go ahead and say, oh, they didn't say that it was Genshin, but the fact that you immediately think of Genshin just means that the problem is true and that their complaint is valid. No. You can look at the comments that were left in the video to see what the poster was really aiming for. But you can even see the intent without the comments. Brother tagged Genshin related topics and hashtags. In fact, there's almost as much Genshin tags on it compared to the actual Azure Lane topics, so it kinda made me doubt if they even wanted to praise Azure Lane in the first place. And like I said, I'm down to see your average Genshin slop every now and then, but when they are complaining about things that were just outright idiotic to complain about, I've seen enough of these types of posts to also say, you know what, let me smoke this stupidity out real quick. To begin with, those who are willing to do that little bit of research would see that the video was actually a video showcase for Azure Promilia instead of Azure Lane. The latter is a gacha side-scroller released in 2017 that revolves around literal ships turned into waifus. Meanwhile, the former, Azure Promilia, is a new and upcoming gacha game that the same developers are making using the Azure IP. Only this time, they are turning it into an open-world fork, as is what most gacha games these days are attempting to do with their IPs. Do you guys, see the problem already? First, they referred to Genshin as a multi-million-dollar game. It's a multi-billion-dollar game. Second, they say that the clips they are showing are from Azure Lane, when a quick search clearly shows that it wasn't. Someone even pointed out the fact that this wasn't Azure Lane in the comments, and all the OG poster said was, yeah, because they know. That should be enough to prove the idiocy of their so-called comparison with Genshin. And lastly, Azure Promilia isn't even out yet. Hell, it doesn't even have a proper release date just yet. They are comparing the fundamental features of an upcoming game which still has all the opportunity to develop and change their game's fundamentals to a live service game that's been on a 6-week update cycle for almost 5 years now that no longer has the time to change those fundamentals. Mind you, Azure Lane was released in 2017. So for them to get a new game 8 years later and comparing it with a game that's only almost 5 years old definitely should make sense to the logical mind. Now, again, like I said, I'm down for some complaining every now and then, but to put it this way while also exposing just how little you know about game development and underestimating the amount of work needed to even consider those kinds of changes on a live game really hurts the representation of your IQ, and it just exposes the enormous size of your ignorance. Because I want you guys to look at this comment that the poster mentioned, and before you read it, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a video game programmer or someone who works with video game engines. Put yourself in their shoes and tell me if you can read the following comment without shitting your brain. Multi-billion-dollar company but still can't upgrade the game's engine. Aha, yes, someone has to tell Nubaruki here that upgrading a game's engine isn't as simple as pressing update and then installing something in Steam, much less the game engine of a game that is still very actively running as a live service product with an update schedule of 6 weeks between each patches. And it doesn't even take long for you to see that fact from other video games in general. Once a game engine is locked in for the official live release of a game, the devs will more often than not stick with that specific iteration of the game engine, down to the versions and all that. They only update or port it when specific iteration of that game engine itself no longer receives support from the people making them. Because having to change anything about your game's engine means sinking a dick ton amount of time to making sure that those changes do not absolutely brick your product. And people also have to understand that a dick ton amount of time doesn't mean weeks or months. No, it means at the very minimum a year or two. And that range can only grow larger the bigger the game is. So sure, Nubaruki, go ahead and talk with the Genshin dev team, or as a matter of fact, go ahead and walk up to any game dev team, sit up in their office, and tell them to upgrade their game's engine at the snap of their finger. And trust me, it would be a miracle if you're able to leave the premise through anything other than getting chucked through a window. It's stupid. They could have also just looked at gaming history and looked at the fact that in the handful of times where major games actually changed out their engines in favor of being able to improve fundamental and core video game features such as lighting, logical functions, and just overall revamping certain major game features, look at the amount of time it took for those developers to achieve it. Biggest example that I can think of and is personally very close to me, Counter-Strike, specifically from CSGO into CS2. You know how long it took for them to then decide to make that change? Just about over 11 years. Do you know how many major graphical changes they did in the span of those years? 0. Do you know how many new guns that they introduced into the game in the same span of 11 years? 5. Although technically 4, because one of them was just the silenced version of the M4A4 called the M4A1S, which ironically was the gun that already existed in the previous iterations of CS, so people just kinda didn't understand why the S version wasn't a thing from the start. Their major graphics, physics, and feature overhauls only came in the time where they switched out to CS2 because, well, they switched out their engine. And did they end up making a better product? To some people, including me, it was worse than what they had in CSGO. Sure, guns are shinier, smoke blooms look cool and all, and the maps look cooler as well, but general performance now sucks. Spraying sucks. Netcode quote-unquote improvements gets you killed from out of nowhere, and the cheaters, wow, if you didn't know any better, you might have thought that they removed anti-cheat altogether. People's harping point is always, well, but Hoyo must have the money to build more of their team that can dedicate themselves to building new engines while the other team maintains the game. Folks, time is the problem. To begin with, there ain't no way they are stretching their team that way. That's just inhumane. And you can have as much money as you want in the world, but with the update cycle that they have, the amount of other projects that they have, the amount of divisions that they have by default working on 3 highly active live service games, I mean, you guys tell me how feasible it sounds like. Putting a team of competent and most likely expensive engineers to then make an improved engine on the side in order to then be simultaneously QA'd with the live version of your live service game to make sure that it can one day be properly ported over, all while making sure that no junk fucks itself over when code and programming, especially when you aren't the one who made it in the first place, has a general stability that's no better than the mental strength of a high school emo teenager in the mid-2000s? Yeah, you'd sound like an idiot for just trying to simplify it to that kind of level. Just upgrade the game engine, yeah, suck a fart out, man. I think people just severely underestimated how much of clueless cruds Hoyoverse were when they began developing Genshin. Much less can people begin to even understand the humongous risk that the company was taking by making an open-world gacha game. They used Unity to begin with, and there are people who say that they then used a customized version of Unity, but I can't exactly find proper source to that. I don't even know if they still use Unity, and by now, the main team working on Genshin probably had to bend over backwards to make sure that any feature they added to the game wouldn't completely destroy the code that their predecessors have left them with. The QA on that alone can take up most of the time that they have between each developmental cycle. The market when they were releasing this thing itself was very uncertain. Are they going to be able to make the game a success? They wouldn't know. No one has ever done it before. And for those of you who keep saying things like, oh then, but how come games like WoWa are able to smash their fundamental features out of the park? Well, because they learned. But more importantly, they had the time to take the previous knowledge that Genshin would have had made public to the market and incorporate it to the fundamental coding of their game. Which is why when people make comparisons between WoWa graphics and animations with Genshin, I still say, yeah, WoWa looks incredible. Their graphics are objectively more powerful than what Genshin can provide, and Genshin players just need to accept that. But of course, what else was I supposed to expect? For it to be worse? That just doesn't make sense. These upcoming games have to be better than Genshin. They simply have to be. They have an incredible blueprint in Genshin to copy from, both in terms of figuring out how they want to develop their game and how they want to utilize the market that has now been thoroughly researched through Genshin's impact itself. Because you know what happens when they don't get on top of taking advantage of those now established metrics? Well, you get Tower of Fantasy. I don't know how that game is still alive at this point, but you can clearly see what happens to an open world gacha game when they don't avoid the pitfalls that Genshin discovered. And it's a shame because I actually liked that game. It's just that the story was hot garbage and optimization was kinda poor, plus power creep was quite a big issue at the start. And all of that prevented the game from reaching the heights that it probably could have. To be honest, I was really surprised when I heard that Wuwa's anniversary went the Genshin route. Like, really? Like, I just genuinely didn't believe it. These guys are always parroted to be the most generous developers, and that's about the most obvious thing that they cannot screw up. But for them to literally make Genshin's mistake 4 years later makes me understand why their player base made such a big deal out of it. Meanwhile, the rest of the Genshin players just sat there and was like, first time. And people also have to understand that Genshin is still a mobile-centric game. This facet is enough for them to be held back in many sections of their development just because they have to keep thinking about their mobile market because, well, they have to. That's where they make their money. Which is why I also understand that graphical advancements that Wuwa, Azure Pamelia, and other future gacha namers like Ananta will come at a cost. People in the Wuwa player base cannot understand how Wuwa on occasions make monthly revenue that is below their expectations, while Hoyo's 3 flagships are constantly on the roll. Well, it is because of portable accessibility. Hoyo is just much better at ensuring that. People ain't gonna spend money on your game if they can't run it in the first place. You guys know how difficult it was to get Wuwa running smoothly even when you have a relatively beefy computer. I certainly had that issue with the game. When people say Genshin is optimized for mobile, I think they underestimate the kinds of mobile phone that can run Genshin. You guys are probably thinking older iPhones, but the optimization in question is really aimed so that people with literal $200 third world second-hand phones have a chance at running it. Though of course, depending on where you are in the world, you can always get something for cheaper. To give you guys a better perspective at the expected performance gap, Wuwa's minimum requirement specs for PC is equal to Genshin's recommended specs. Genshin's minimum specs only ask for you to at least have a device with the graphics performance of a GT 1030, which to hyperbolically simplified for you guys, is probably about equal with the same amount of graphics power your grandpa's computer from 15 years ago would have. Literal potatoes. That being said, just a quick PSA because I love you guys if you're watching this. If you have any respect for yourself, your wallet, or your parents' wallet, please do not buy a GT 1030. Even 10-year-old second-hand half-decent GPUs can beat any new GT 1030 in terms of price and performance. Linus Tech Tips can vouch for me on this one. That's why I'm going to emphasize on the fact that this is the dumbass way to complain about Genshin. Because you have to understand, there is a correct way to complain about Genshin. Sure, any complaint is by default subjective, but there are ways to guarantee that the underlying logic behind the complaint would be objectively sound. It reminds me of an even older video where this guy complains about Genshin's code, and ironically, there's actually both sides where a couple of his complaints are logically sound, but most of the rest of them just didn't have the same type of logic supporting it. I only watched it because I was actually curious if Genshin was severely limited by how donkey their initial code may have been due to their inexperience. He talks about how he dies when supposedly iframing with Yoimiya's ult, when if you pause it, you can see the rock wave hitting Yoimiya in the last frame before he ults, which is just an unfortunate case that he was a split frame late on hitting the burst. He complains about how Eula doesn't funnel energy through her burst when it literally is just because of how long her ult animation lasts. Though actually, I've had cases where I can funnel energy if you manage to sprint away from your energy orbs fast enough, but just either play her with A or Rosaria and a proper rotation should solve that. He complains that only Hu Tao has that whole phasing through things feature and says that dodging in general should be the same as that, when really, that was a feature special to only Hu Tao's sprint mechanic. It wasn't something that was meant to be a general use case. He complains about how Genshin didn't want to find a fix to a Yae Miko targeting issue when a quick search was enough to see that the devs actually listened to the people wanting their previous targeting mechanic back, which wasn't a problem to begin with. It's just that the devs thought that she was supposed to play a different way, but the moment the player base said, hell nah, they just said, okay, we'll put it back. Same thing happened with Beyblade Nouvellette. He even wanted to make it so that if you have a shield, then enemies shouldn't be able to push you, like physically displace you, which yeah, logically sound. It's not like you just suddenly gain Saitama level of standing power when you use Zhongli's shield. You're still physically there. Get hit by a 2-ton crocodile and I doubt most characters would canonically not at least get pushed even with invincibility shields. Now, like I said before, contrary to those points, he did have some proper and logically sound complaints. Like the fact that Jean's burst forces you to look at her face and changes your camera angle when you finish the animation. Or Deia's kit. Like literally, the entirety of Deia's kit. This is what I mean when there is a correct way to be complaining about Genshin. And by that, I mean that there are actually a lot of ways to be correctly complaining about Genshin. Fundamentally, Deia's kit just doesn't make sense. An off-field tank in a game where shields and off-field healing is just insanely strong? A seemingly strong brawling burst that cannot make use of any supporting kit that would have made it worth using in the first place? It also just ended up disconnecting from her character as well. Sure, Deia taking damage for others is on par with her character, but then having her do it off-field instead of her being the one grueling it as the active character just canonically doesn't make sense. And I was veritably pissed at this because I love Deia's character. I loved her design, and I think her character story is one of the best written character stories that Genshin has. So to see her receive such a lackluster kit was a massive kick in the balls for me. Speaking of story, that's another more logical facet to complain about Genshin, because they have far more control over what they can narratively put in the game instead of being restricted by technological elements. Screwing that up creates greater consequences, as it should actually do. Beyond complaints that revolves around something like, I guess, not Christ circumstances, I can give you an easier example. Like, let's say, version 5.3, Incandescent Ode of Resurrection. When you put Capitano alongside Aether and Mavuika, fighting Gusoithoth as your version splash screen, you would think that you can then expect to see such a scene happen in the story itself. And obviously, it created big hype. A Harbinger fighting alongside the Archon and the Traveler, even more so when it's Capitano and Mavuika, was a scene that I think everyone wanted to see. Fast forward to the quest itself and we barely see Capitano play the direct role that the splash screen would have suggested. Sure, he has a big role in terms of the bigger picture, but people understandably felt like they've been blueballed because he was not part of the Gusoithoth fight like at all. And they could have made it make sense for him to come into the Night Kingdom and fight alongside Mavuika and Aether, because I genuinely thought that at the end of version 5.2's Archon quest where they teased him talking with Yohual Tekotin, is that he was going there to ask and see if he himself could get an ancient name so that Mavuika can actually take him to join in the fighting. Because if someone from beyond Teyvat can get an ancient name, then what's to say that someone from Teyvat cannot get an ancient name?
He's gonna forge an ancient name for himself. He's gonna forge an ancient name for himself. I'm gonna call it right here.
And there are many more logically sound complaints that you can shoot at them, many of which I've covered in various other videos. Skip buttons, the fact that they put in some sort of artifact loadout system but make it completely not what people wanted in the first place, artifact salvaging options the way Star Rail has, complain about the fact that having the Traveler, the main character, be predominantly mute was definitely a huge narrative and creative mistake. You should already get my point by now. There are many things that you can rightfully complain about, but these people just decided to just do ones that make them look like complete idiots. People within those videos that I showed you are sometimes the kind of people that just straight up needs to be asked. If you think it's so easy and so doable, then why don't you directly suggest it to them or show them? And I don't mean in a way where you just like make a video telling people that the problem exists. Make that video and give your solution. Or better yet, do what I do. When I complain about the story, I give suggestions. I give fixes that I think would be logical to do. It may not be what everyone agrees to, but at least I make it known and incite discussion. Guy who complains about Genshin's code just to say, it'll take testing, but it should be easy. How? How is it easy? Just because you said so? Why not show a scenario where it would be easy? It doesn't even have to be a real scenario. Just one that can representatively show the notion that you're suggesting. One of them even said, why have limited stamina in an open world game? And it probably clued me into the notion that they probably don't play a lot of open world games to begin with, because a lot of open world games uses stamina. There is simply no point in asking for things that clearly wasn't in Genshin's framework to begin with. because that's just not how video game development works. You want them to put AI mouth and dub sync-ups when it was a game released in 2020, and the only other major title which had successfully used such a feature at the time was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Even so, they have shown that they can put it in for their games that had the opportunity to have such features in their games. Star Rail has it, and Zenless has it. Incorporating AI dub sync is not as simple as dropping a node in a GIMP port. You want improved shading and textures. There's not only that initial problem of optimization and performance, but advancing lighting and shaders when you already have an established game, level designs, and overall look is just a change that they won't be willing to go through with their engine due to the time constraints. But in the areas like pre-rendered cutscenes, it's clear that they have improved their ability to utilize those features in their animations, which shows that there must be something holding them back from being able to fully port it into the actual gameplay portions. Yet, once again, they made sure that their future products took full advantage of those improvements. If you want any sort of hope for those changes to ever be seen, then it will more than likely be in the form of a sequel game. Just like how Honkai Impact improved their overall UI and look by making Honkai Impact 3rd the second, which is one of the weirdest game naming schemes I've seen in life, but you know, what else would you do? Maybe that whole Genshin 1000 star thing that people found on Bilibili that time can be that sequel? We won't know for now. Of course, the Genshin devs did say that they have acknowledged the fact that average players probably should have beefier devices by now and are going to push game performances coming into Not Cry. But I'm actually very cautious of that and hope that they can keep budget playability as the priority, unless they want to push for the whole stream your game thing, which I also ain't much of a fan of just yet. So please, I get that unbridled hatred for Genshin is kind of the rave over these past few years, but make sure you don't out yourself as a complete idiot when doing so. Maintain a point of objectivity if you can, but above all, make it make sense. Keep it logical, or else you just make things that matter go by the wayside just because you wanted to get some algorithmic traction. At the end of it all, that wouldn't help anyone. That's it. Thank you for watching as always. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you guys next time. Sayonara.